further ado, let's invite Roger, the filmmaker, up here. So, Roger, come up.
He was like.
What happened is when they were, after they had put together Reservoir Dogs and we were going around, we were looking at like locations all around Los Angeles. And one of the locations that Lawrence got taken to was this bank location on, I think it's on Hollywood. It's on Hollywood Boulevard, Hollywood and I think Highland, or maybe not Highland. Anyhow, it's in Hollywood, and it was this bank. And he's like, "Okay, we've scouted all these locations. We found this amazing bank location, but we have no need for a bank in Reservoir Dogs." And so I'm calling all the writers that I know, and finding out if you have a script that takes place in a bank, I can get a couple $100,000 together, and we can make a movie in there because we can get the location really cheap. He was making movies at that time for just a couple $100,000, and then they were doing Reservoir Dogs, and that was his biggest film because Quentin was happening in that moment. And so he called me up and he said, "Do you have a script that takes place in a bank?" And I said, yeah, I do. I have one. And he said, "Well, great. Well, give it to me." And I said, "Okay, I'll see you on Wednesday." And this was like a Thursday, and I sat down and I quickly wrote one.
Yeah, you actually did not have a script in a bank.
I had no script. I had no script that took place in a bank.
And this is what you mean by I
would
have done anything to make this movie.
I would have done like Leprechaun 2 if I could have. I would have killed to do Leprechaun 2.
Leprechaun Back to the Hood.
I mean, back then, Leprechaun 1 was still, technically, Leprechaun came out at the same time as Reservoir Dogs and actually smoked it at the box office. And Leprechaun's a good movie, actually.
And it is a good movie.
We like Warwick
But you
Davis.
wrote this script basically in a week.
So really on a weekend, and then I just polished it up before I gave it to him. And so, I'm writing really fast. I know that it's going to take place in a bank. I looked at the bank first. Like on that Thursday, I said, "Oh, I'll go look at the bank." And I looked at it, and I looked at the layout of the bank, and I looked at the kind of the geography downstairs, and they had these kind of arrangements of the vaults, and so I kind of ended up writing that into the script, this whole idea of you have to get into this one vault, and then from that vault you can get into this vault, and then from that vault you can get out of the vault much easier. And that was because of the arrangement at this bank, and we ended up not shooting at that location. I wrote the script, I took it to Lawrence, he was like, "Great," and then we proceeded to try to get the movie going, and went all around Los Angeles, and it was just too weird. And what had happened was I knew that the movie was going to be in a bank, and I'm like, okay, if it's in a bank, it's probably a bank robbery. So that's why it's a crime film. And so it's okay, it's going to be a bank robbery, but what can I do that's going to be different? Like, what can I do that's going to be, something different? I thought, I'll make a French film. Like, that's what I'll do.
But you had recently traveled to France.
I had it wasn't quite. Let me see. It was 4 years before. I had been traveling through France, and backpacking through France, and like a Eurail pass and traveling around. And I found myself in Paris, and I hated Paris, and I hated the French, and I hated everything about it. I was like, this sucks.
So the Eric Stoltz character is really kind of a pseudo-cipher, because I know a lot of the things of course you didn't rob a bank, and I don't believe you were high on heroin that night.
No, I actually haven't ever done heroin, but I've been close enough to it with my friends that, and actually I was always terrified of heroin because of this movie, Who'll Stop the Rain, with Nick Nolte. And the movies of the 70s pretty much turned me off to the very concept of heroin. And then at that time in the 90s, when I started making this movie, when we were making the movie at very low budget for a film of this kind, and we're working on it, and you go into a bubble when you're making a movie. And when I emerged from that bubble, it was like heroin was everywhere all of a sudden, all across Los Angeles. It was a shock. And so it was. You
incorporated it. It was like therapy almost.
Yeah, well, whenever you make a movie, you incorporate yourself into it, and you're making a movie about yourself, even if it's not about you. In fact, no matter what you do, if you're a plumber or an electrician, or you see yourself in your work, you see yourself in how you design the plumbing or how you wire the electric, and you invest yourself into what you do and make. And as a filmmaker, it's no different. It's just that you're a lot more naked when you go up on screen, especially when it's independent cinema, when you're being given a little bit of a longer leash to have fun with, to explore ideas a little bit deeper than you normally would. And I've kind of always viewed movies as a very expensive form of therapy, which I don't do therapy, but
You make films, yeah.
I make movies instead. Kiefer Sutherland would have been another one, like another Canadian I would have gone to. And I had originally thought there was this French actor, Lothaire Bluteau, who was in Jesus of Montreal. He was really good. And I was thinking maybe him. And then I started going down the road with these Canadian producers, and it was like a machine. But what I needed in order to get the movie made as part of their thing was pre-sales. The way a movie comes together is you have a certain amount of subsidies that you get from like local government if you're able to do that, and that brings down the price of your film. And then you pre-sell territories around the world on the promise of what the movie will be, and then you take that paper and you go to the bank and blah, 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 blah. And so I had to go to the Cannes Festival to sell territories. Okay, I had no money at the time, I was broke. But I bought a ticket, I flew to Cannes, and the director Monty Hellman, who directed Tulane Blacktop and Iguana and a bunch of other movies I really love, he let me sleep on his floor. And I couldn't afford to eat at like restaurants, and so like I would go to parties and eat hors d'oeuvres. I'd go, oh, I'll have more of those. And I was just going to the parties and just eating hors d'oeuvres. And every now and then somebody would take me out to lunch or something. And what happened was, even though I was just like, my movie was not going, all those people who were in Los Angeles who had said no to me, then suddenly they saw me in Cannes, and I was there, and I was selling territories, and I had started selling territories. And one of the first territories I sold was France because of that. And Samuel Hadida, who was the producer of this film, bought France because he had produced True Romance, the film Quentin wrote and Tony Scott directed, and that I had some hand in. And so Sammy, I met with him, and he said, "Oh, you come to Paris, and I'll make your movie, and we'll cast whoever you want." And so what I had done was, at Video Archives, I was working at this video store at the time, like off and on, and I went there and I took all of these VHS tapes of like a Louvre documentary and La Femme Nikita and Betty Blue and like all of these, Thief, the Michael Mann movie. I took all of them and I cut my own trailer together using other movies. And I did like a little narration for it, and I made like a little trailer for the film. And then I was showing that to people and like, oh, this is what the movie's gonna be like. I later learned you're actually not allowed to do that. It's like some kind of copyright violation, I guess, but it gave people an idea of what the movie was going to be, and so people started buying it. And then Sammy was like, "Yeah, come to Paris, and I'll introduce you to these actors on your list." I check into this little hotel right behind his offices on Rue Lord Byron, and it was this little tiny hotel, but I couldn't afford the hotel. I actually couldn't afford to pay it. I had a credit card, but it was maxed out. But in those days, they would just run like a carbon copy of they would just run the card, and then they would do it later, and they would call it in. And I just kind of checked into the room. And then I thought, well, if I don't get the movie made, I'll just throw my bag out the window, and then I'll get to the airport somehow. I'll figure out, I'll just leave France. And so instead, Sammy set me up. He's like, "Oh, I'll set you up on meetings with Irene Jacob and Johnny Gringlade and Julie and a couple of other people that I was thinking about." And so I go in and I meet with Irene Jacob, and I sit down with her, and I'm really, and it's a fancy French. He, of course, put me into this fancy French restaurant that there was no way I could pay for anything on the menu. And so we sit there and talking, and right away she said, "I can't do your movie. I can't do it because Christophe is planning another film, and I think that was The Double Life of Veronique." and or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe she was actually waiting to do Red. I can't remember. Anyhow, she basically told me no, I can't do it, and then I proceeded to just keep talking to her until Sammy showed up because I couldn't afford to pay the bill. And then Sammy came in, and I started thinking, okay, this isn't coming together. I'm not even getting the actors that I want. But then John Hugh came to the meeting, afterwards, and it was like, okay, I hadn't seen him with long hair, and that yellow jacket that he's wearing in the movie, it's actually his jacket, and he wore that to the meeting. And his manager was with him, and she sat down and she said, okay, so John Hugh has read the script, and we love it. We love it. What do we have to do to convince you for him to be in the movie? And that's like a great way to begin. And so well, let's talk first. And so I immediately started talking to him, and he said, I've grown my hair long, and can I keep my hair long? And I was like, absolutely. And I'm very giving as a director. I give actors a lot of latitude.
Well, especially with the Eric Stoltz character, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit.
Absolutely. And so basically, Sammy, he was in my trailer, and Sammy, because of that, Sammy arranged a meeting, and he liked the script, and because he agreed to do it, everything else fell in place.
I find it fascinating, though, when we were driving earlier today, and we were talking a little bit about the Eric character when he's playing. And we spoke, though, it is a cipher for you, but he does a lot of things that you don't do, and those were actor choices.
Yeah, well, as written, the Zed character is the one character who doesn't smoke and who doesn't use a gun. And naturally, Eric was like, don't take away my actor's tools. It's like, and I don't smoke, but as an actor, I smoke. So he smokes. He just does it when he's playing.
He just does it as an actor, in
he
his
does it
method.
as an actor. And so he insisted on that. And I don't like to, I feel like it's a collaboration, and there's times when an actor needs to be guided and put onto a path, but also it's not meant to just be me as a dictator telling you what to do. I'm just kind of there to sort of guide and to pay attention to the tone and the mood, and to let him also explore things within him, because the movie, the Zed character, it's not me. It's also not Eric, but it's also Eric, and it's also me in some ways. It's a composite of the two of us. When you see the Rules of Attraction, if you come tomorrow to see the Rules of Attraction, the Kip Pardue character traveling across Europe, okay, that was me. That's what I did. As embarrassed as I am about all that behavior, that's what I did, and it's a little bit me, but it's also a little bit Kip, because we did it for real. And so it becomes a kind of composite of everybody involved making the movie, and I mean everybody involved making the movie.
Now, what about Julie?
So Julie, she had already moved to Los Angeles, and she was living in Los Angeles. Eric was living in New York. John Hugh was in Paris. Julie was already in Los Angeles, and she had just done a movie with Percy Adlon called Younger and Younger, I think was the name of the movie. And so she was kind of trying to break in and everything, and she wasn't sure she wanted to do the movie. She was like, I don't know if I really understand it, and I'm not sure. And so I said, well, why don't we have lunch and we'll talk about it? And so we went to, I said, where would you like to go? And she said, I want to go to Venice Beach. And so she had never been there, and so we went to Venice Beach, and we had like a little cafe lunch, and we talked about the movie. And then we walked out, and in Venice, there's like, on the boardwalk in Venice, on one side you've got like shops, and on the other side of the boardwalk, the ocean side of the boardwalk, there's like spaces that are traditionally allowed for,
It's like street vendors.
Street vendors are allowed to come in and basically sell their wares, artists and whatnot, and it's kind of an eclectic mix. Well, one of these people was a fortune teller, this woman, like a gypsy, so dressed like a gypsy, as a fortune teller, and doing tarot cards and stuff. And Julie said, oh, look, it's a fortune teller. And I said, well, let's go. Let's have her tell our fortune. And we sat down, and I can credit the fortune teller for Julie being in the movie, because the fortune teller basically said, "Oh, this man is going to have a very important role in your life, and this man is blah blah blah." And she just went through the whole thing, and it was sounded like she knew, like I had paid her off beforehand. But she was like, "Whatever he's trying to convince you of, you should do it." And it was literally like that. And so Julie said yes. She said she turned, and Julie's like that. She believes in things like that, 100%. So she turned to me right away and was like, "I'll do it. I'll do it. I'm in."
Kind of went in there and you edited, and then some
Okay,
stuff
so
happened.
yeah, so here's what happened. In those days, okay, so the way it works is you make your movie, you edit your movie. I'm done editing my movie. I send it to the Motion Picture Association of America's CARA ratings board, and this is a special ratings board of the Motion Picture Association, and they rate everything. They're the ones that are responsible for the parental guidance cards that are before a film. And so they had me come in, and I'm supposed to take the movie in and show it to them. And I went in and I showed them the film. And I'm like an independent guy, and they throw you to the wolves when you're an independent filmmaker. Like there's stuff in, like the stuff that was in this film, it was not like the stuff that was cut out of this movie to achieve an R rating. They came at me really, really, really hard. They made me cut so much that it started damaging the film. And because the movie was made for such a low budget, I only shot what I could afford. Like I shot what I needed, and there was no latitude to and there's no possibility of doing reshoots. And so I cut the movie down, and I got to a point where it's like, I can't cut this anymore. It's damaging the film. And that's when they kicked me out of the editing room. And they brought in Kubrick's editor, Martin Hunter. He's not really Kubrick's editor. He's actually Kubrick's hands, who's actually probably conforming stuff for him while Kubrick is editing. But he was Kubrick's guy. And that was sort of his claim to fame. And Martin's actually a really nice guy. He's a British guy. He's a really nice guy. I'm friends with him even after this happened. But he came in and he said, "Oh, don't worry. I do this all the time. It's going to be fine." And I'm like, "It's not going to be fine. You're going to fuck with my movie, motherfucker." But they kicked me out. He went ahead and edited it. I watched what he did. I hated it. And I proceeded to start flipping out. And the producers were like, not only do you send the movie, this is like before videotape. I mean, we had videotape, but we weren't doing transfers. And so you would take the reels of the film to the Motion Picture Association's ratings board, and they would screen it. They would watch it on a movie theater, just like anybody else would, and react to it like you might. And so the edits were just too much for me, and I was freaking out. And I knew that the movie had to go to have its negative cut, and I had been already removed. And so I broke into the editing room one night, and I reconformed everything back to how it was. And then I looked at what the frame count was that had been cut, because that's what they really look at. They don't have time. At least this was my reasoning. They don't have time to watch the whole thing and to really pay attention to it. But they do check the frame count to see if you've cut or added stuff. And you're supposed to provide that. And so I just trimmed stuff in other places and lengthened things out and added stuff back. Never told anybody. And then the negative got sent out and cut. And the movie got sent into theaters, and the movie was released. And
Exactly how
and
you
what
wanted
you
it.
saw is absolutely not allowed by the Motion Picture Association. This was absolutely not the
R rating.
The R-rated cut. This was. Now, having said that, there is a director's cut available that has a scene that I had to cut out of the film and a couple of other things that I restored back. And I watched it after we remastered it, and I was like, I can live with most of the cuts the way I have them in the film here. I still think a few moments suffer. A few transitions suffer a little bit, but I can live with this. Well, I want to keep alive the vernacular of cinema, which is not in the perfection of cinema, but in the faults of cinema. It's the the faults of cinema that we tend to remember. When we think about an old movie, you know, we think about sepia tone, we think about gate weave, we think about dust and scratches. Well, none of that was, you know, or we think about high rates of speed, you know, and motion. None of that was existing in its original projection. The film hadn't yet shrunk, so there was no gate weave. The film was pristine, and so the image was clear. The projectionist was cranking the projector at the proper speed. There was no sepia discoloration to the film. And so what we now lovingly try to imitate in filters, you know, are the defects of film. It's the mistakes of a movie that we come to love much more. In fact, they say that the power of theater is in spontaneity, that, you know, that you never know what's going to happen on screen. Well, I think a movie is the same way. When you're making a movie, you're just trying to gather together all these spontaneous moments. You're trying to capture things that feel spontaneous and edit them together. Okay, there's a story behind Ron Jeremy. I was, when I was in Cannes trying to get the movie made, as I said, I think I told that story earlier.
Yeah, you did.
I was trying to get the movie going, and, you know, like I said, I would have made anything at that time with anybody, and I was trying to put anybody in my movie, and I had bumped into Richard Grieco from 21 Jump Street, or Booker, who played Booker on 21 Jump Street before his own show, Booker. And I bumped into Richard Grieco, and I wasn't a Richard Grieco fan, but I started talking to Richard Grieco, and I was like, you know what, you're a cool guy, I like you. And so we started hanging out. So I was hanging out with Richard Grieco in Cannes, and I tried to talk him into being in my movie, and we're walking down the Croisette at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I see Ron Jeremy walking toward us with these two
Girls.
Yeah, girls, two ladies. And at Cannes, in those days, there was the Palm Door, but there was also the Hot Door, which was the Golden Hot, which is the porn awards. And that would take place at the same time in Cannes. And so they would have these porn awards there. And so Ron Jeremy was there for the porn awards. And he's walking down, he walked past me, and I turned to Richard, and I was like, that was Ron Jeremy. And he was like, it was? And I was like, yeah, Ron. And Ron turned around, and I was like, this is Richard Grieco. And Ron is like a star fucker. And so he immediately glommed onto Richard Grieco, and so did the girls. And that was like the last I saw of Richard Grieco. But I hung out with Ron Jeremy after that. And I was like, okay, like, I've walked down the streets of this planet with a lot of stars. No one opens doors like Ron Jeremy. This guy is known everywhere, was known at least. And in that moment, it was like peak Ron Jeremy. Like, everyone knew Ron Jeremy. He was like a superstar. And it was like, why? And he desperately wanted, like, this is a guy who went to acting classes with Pacino. Like, they were together in acting classes, like in New York. Like, they were both coming up. And that was in an age when guys like Stallone would go out and make porn films. Like, that it wasn't unusual for Francis Coppola to go direct a porn movie. That happened. And so, like, Ron Jeremy coming up just had a big dick and was not that great of an actor. He's decent, but he just excelled in porn.
But he had so much fun that day on set, didn't he?
Yes, Ron, like, and I love Ron. I mean, he's actually a really sweet guy. He's, I'm sure there's a dark side, but but he's a really, like, to me, he's a nice guy. And so I wanted to put him in my movie, and I wanted to give him like a little part, and I wanted to kill him, and with a shotgun. And he really took it seriously. He's like, okay, so the button is down here, and now we have to, and like, he really, like, what's my motivation? It was one of those things. It's like, he really got into his role, his moment. Yeah, I have really, really good advice that was given to me by someone who's now passed away, who was a customer at Video Archives and became a friend, and in fact became like a surrogate father to me. I mean, I have a very good relationship with my father, but this guy, John Langley, who did the TV show Cops, I was one of the very first employees on Cops. You know, this was a guy who, when we were working at the video store.
He was like borrowing money from you and Quentin.
Yeah,
and,
like
eating
well,
cockroaches.
from all of
and,
us, like we would all gather.
as like kids. He's
Well,
like
because he was
borrowing-
moving around, like he'd have like.
He's like the beach dude.
Yeah, like they lived in like in over his family. And this guy with kids, he lived in like something like 7 houses in 2 years because they kept having to jump out of rent situations. And he's a filmmaker. He's like he's mostly doing assistant director work and mostly doing things for Geraldo Rivera, like breaking into Al Capone's vaults. I don't know if you remember that. He did that. And one of the things that he had was, I'm going to do a Dolph Lundgren exercise video. And so he came to the store and he's like, I need some PAs. And so Quentin and I became PAs on this Dolph Lundgren exercise video, which was literally like, you show up on Venice Beach and, we're the first ones there because we're the PAs, the production assistants. And you show up and everybody's sitting around having coffee, and even the hobos are sitting around having coffee. And the guys on the truck are like, okay, kids, Dolph is going to be doing aerobics with all these girls on this little grassy hill here and overlooking the ocean. And it's covered in dog shit. So here's a roll of paper towels. Go clean that up. There better not be anything that gets on Dolph. And so Quentin and I are out there like picking up dog shit with our hands. Like, oh, man, we're going to be out there helping the PAs, when we're directors. And he's like one of the great, great Los Angeles independent filmmakers because he finances himself, he shoots himself, he edits himself, he's literally at the American film market selling territory by territory all of his films. Like, I really admire him as a filmmaker. Anyhow, I have no money. What am I going to do? I go in and I meet with him, and now he's got a big office, and he's like, hey, lad, it's like I got picked up by Fox because of the writer's strike. There's no writers on Cops. And so they had this writer's strike, and that's why Fox picked up Cops. So suddenly he's like flush, and I go in and I ask him, it's like, John, I got to ask you, what kind of advice can you give a guy like me who's struggling and trying to come up in the business? He said, lad, start at the top. That's the best way. Don't try to work your way up the ladder. That doesn't work. Don't try to, first be a grip and then a this and then an AD. And the minute you become an AD, you'll be an AD for the rest of your life. If you want to be a director, be a director. Tell people you're a director. If you want to be an actor, tell people you'll be an actor. Be an actor. If you want to be a writer, you're a writer. Tell people what you are and be that. And I said, okay. I quit. And he was like, what? And I thought he was going to be mad. I gave notice, but I didn't just walk out. But I thought he was going to be mad at me, but he said, you know what? You're the first guy who ever took my advice instantly. You instantly took my advice. And it immediately, it had this weird dynamic. It immediately put us on the same level. All of a sudden, we were on the same level. I was a director. And he accepted that. Okay, it took me years after that to get my actual movie going. And, and I risked, every time somebody asked me, what are you doing? I'm a director. I'm a director. And they're like, oh, that's great. Jimmy, our busboy, is a director. It's a line from Big Picture.
Thank you so much to the Texas Theater for having us.
Thank you,
thank you to the
everybody.
audience for coming out tonight.
You guys are great. Thank you so much.